and welcome to another episode of How to Be a Great Player. We're looking at the top 8 ways that you can roleplay a different race other than human in your role-playing games and how to make them your own. So, how do we roleplay a different race? We don't really have any kind of comparison, do we? No one really knows what it's like to be a Klingon or an elf, for example. We have to go on what has been established through literature, through imagination, and through movies. Having said that, it still doesn't really tell us how to roleplay one of them. So I'm going to take you through my 8 steps that I use when trying to become the race that I am trying to portray. Step number 1, and you should always follow this step to avoid any kind of wasting of time. Ask your GM what races are allowed in his game. He might not necessarily want you to play an elf, or a dwarf, or a Klingon, or a Minbari, or pick a race. He might not want you to play an undead revenant, even though the race is in the rulebook that you are playing from. Ask the GM what races he would like you to play, if any, and suggest some of the races that you're thinking of playing to see exactly how he sees it fitting into his world. In some worlds, a race which you might take for granted as being a lawful race, the GM might have changed. Perhaps you're playing in an all-Romulan campaign, or perhaps you're playing in a universe where the Emperor did not go around slaughtering all of the alien species. Or perhaps you're playing in a world where humans are uncommon and aliens are more common. Always ask the GM what race you can play and cannot play, and then work from there. Once you've decided on the race that you want to play, and I'm not going to go into how do you decide on what race you want to play, you can come up with the reasons for that. But once you've decided on the race that you want to play, you then need to fully understand that race. So if you're going to play an elf, and you're going to play a particular type of elf, you need to really do your research on what makes an elf, and what is that going to do to your character. Now, I know this sounds silly, but a lot of people go, oh, I'm going to play a halfling, because, well, everyone wants to play a halfling. But they don't actually look into what is a halfling. They might gloss over the stat changes, but that's about it. You don't go any further. Well, to be a true master of your game, to really play the race, you need to do as much research on it as possible. Again, going back to your GM saying, hey, I want to play a particular type of character and a particular class and a particular race. And this race is the one that I've chosen. How does it work in your world? How are they different? How are they the same from all of the other contemporary culture? Which leads us to point number 2. Know the culture. So just saying that you're playing a dwarf doesn't necessarily mean that you are a dwarf. You need to understand what is their culture. How do they celebrate festivals? What are their holidays? Who are their gods? Are they named differently from the other gods in the world? If you're playing a Klingon, have they been raised in the traditional way of the warrior? Or perhaps they've been raised on Earth, in which case it's a different type of Klingon. Or are they Klingons from a different century? Their traditions will be different. Don't just assume they're going to be the same. So always try and get into the particular culture. And if your GM hasn't developed the culture, well then ask the GM if you can do that. My game that I run, set on the world behind me, I love my players coming to me saying, I want to play a kobold. Now traditionally, kobolds are little nasty reptilian creatures that have very little hit points, run around and die often. But this particular kobold, he wanted to play a paladin kobold. And I said, well, why? Between the player and myself, we decided that there was a group of kobolds who once saw a clan of paladins moving in and slaying all of the orcish enemies. They did it with such grace and with such style that it inspired these kobolds to be better than their brethren. So instead of using crude tools and attacking in little groups, they decided to adopt an honor code. By being honourable and by following the way of the warrior, these kobolds could advance themselves and be better. And that was where this player's character was going to come from. And they developed a name. They were known as the Barker kobolds. not because they barked, but because the one paladin that they admired and worshipped, almost as a god, was named Barker. So by working with your GM, suddenly there's this little group of kobolds running around that are very different from the other kobolds on the planet. And that's simply because the player said, well, I want to play a particular race, but I want to change their culture. And if you've got a good GM, he should allow you to work with that particular race, especially if it's a relatively unknown race or a fairly insignificant race in terms of his grand story scheme, and really make it your own. You then need to decide what is everybody else expecting from this race. And expectation is in almost all my videos, what do people expect? So if you're going to be playing a drow, are drow elves all lawful evil? Should all drow elves be bent on serving the spider goddess and slaughtering their enemies? Well, that's entirely up to you. But by knowing what others are expecting, and by knowing what the GM is expecting, it allows you to take that race in a slightly different direction. Perhaps you decide, well, drow society says that being a lawful evil alignment is perfectly acceptable. Follow the laws as far as you can, and when you can, get away with it. Are all tieflings equally as chaotic and evil aligned? Perhaps yours is different, or perhaps the culture he comes from is different. Are all Vulcans logical? Well, perhaps you come from an enclave of Vulcans who broke away, but unlike the Romulans, didn't go down the path of suspicion and paranoia, but just embraced their emotions, like Cybok from Star Trek V. By looking at the expectations of what others have for your race, it allows you to embrace those expectations and say, yes, I am playing an orc. That means I can be brutish and violent, which means during role-playing encounters, I can really bring out the violence and the brutishness and the lack of finesse for good role-playing purposes. However, I can also try and bring in some nuances, a subtler side. Not all orcs are going to be massive, violent creatures. Some of them have to learn architecture in order to help build their houses. Others have to learn some kind of sanitary occupation. Yet others need to be weaponsmiths, armorsmiths, clothier makers, whatever the case might be. It's about looking at what people expect and then adding your own twist to it. It's also about looking at the monster races, and by monster races I really mean races that are considered to be by their very nature a specific type. I've mentioned a few. Drow, orcs, Klingons are all big bloodthirsty warriors. Ferengi are all traders. But by looking at the monster races, or the undead races, or races that are not the traditional good races, such as elves, dwarves, halflings, humans, they're all clumped together in this, oh, these are good races and these are monster races. Monster races are absolutely fine to roleplay. You don't have to be a monster. Just because you're from a Brutus race, let me try that again. Just because you're from a brutish race doesn't mean that you necessarily have to embrace that. Or perhaps you are embracing it, but you're trying to find a way to overcome it. Is your very destructive type of creature that lurks in the dark, are they always destructive? Do they not perhaps hope for something better, but can't help themselves? If you want to have a good example of the monster becoming the hero, simply read Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. The book. You can watch the movies, but the book's better. So, by looking at all of these different things, what do we expect? What's the culture? What do people know about this race? What does the GM want this race to do? We can then take it to the next step. And the next step is to then say, okay, well, what are the attributes of this race? If we're going to play, say, Vulcans, they live for 300 or 400 years, sometimes less. If we're going to play an elf, they live for almost 1,000 years. Even dwarves reach 250. It's only the pathetic little humans who only live for 70-odd years. By living for 1,000 years, if you look at human history, from where we are now, 1,000 years back, 1016, the Normans were getting ready to invade certain areas of England. The Dark Ages were upon us. We had no flight. Our fastest form of communication was writing a letter and giving it to a man who would get on a horse and then ride for however long it took over fairly bad roads to wherever it is that your letter was going to. And you just had to hope that it got there, and then wait patiently for months before you got some kind of response. So if you lived from the Dark Ages all the way through to now, the Dark Ages had no respect for life. If you were a servant or a serf or a peasant or a slave, if you lived or died was completely immaterial. You were seen as property. Even 500 years ago, life was not considered as special as it is now. If you grew up in that kind of environment where life has no meaning, are you really going to change with the times? Or are you going to remain true to your fixations? What you were brought up with is probably what's going to stay with you for a very long time unless you have some very good reasons for changing. The longer lived your race, the more you need to look at the race's decision-making process. Why do I need to kill the king today? If I wait for 50 years, which is practically nothing in my lifetime, he'll be dead of old age. I don't have to risk my life and limb, which is worth far more than his, because I can contribute to far more things than he ever will. Does this mean, though, that a long-lived species doesn't react quickly? That would be foolish. The world moves fairly quickly. Tortoises don't react as quickly. They do live longer. But ultimately, if there's a threat, they respond. So you've got to look at the characteristics of your race. Do they have giant teeth? And if so, how is that going to change the way that they work? Are they going to be more vicious in their attacks against other people? If they are diminutive, how are they going to react in a world where everything is up there and nothing is at your height? The point I'm trying to make is that once you've built up this idea of the race, you then need to start looking at what the physicality of the race will mean for your character. And yes, you can break stereotype and have a muscle-bound elf who's 7 foot tall and cleaves things in one mighty blow, and a scrawny little orc who reads books. But you need to understand, how are those attributes? How is being green? How is not necessarily having copper-based blood? How is that, or iron-based blood, how is that going to change the way that you operate, the way that your character should be thinking? Is it long-term strategy? And then another thing to do is to pick a particular quality of that race and explore it. So if everyone expects the race to be lawful evil, well, perhaps you should be lawful evil, but you should be striving to do something against that. You should be perhaps an inquiring drow who asks people, but why did you save his life? He had no meaning for us. Saving his life was a waste of time and energy. So that your drow, although they are embodying the expectation of that race, they are forcing the other players to question what they believe about the race and to defend their own race. In other words, by looking at your race, you're now starting to engage the other players on subjects that are not just related to the mission. This is what truly separates people from being a good role player from being a great role player. I'm using every single element that I can from my character to create new levels of conversation, to create new paths of questioning, which don't necessarily pop up in a regular game. Instead of just playing an angry orc, I'm playing a questioning orc, or a broody orc, or an orc who really loves music, but can't play it because his fingers are not dexterous enough, or perhaps he's just never learned. And so that's why he's decided to venture with this party of humans. That decision comes from his race, or from the stereotypes that we think of when we think of that particular type of race. And then finally, point number 8, the best thing to do is once you've got this race, this character that is an embodiment of the race and that's challenging the race and that's bringing things around, don't be afraid to add things to the race. It's a very poor GM where if you say to him, my character needs to stop and pray to the seven suns. The way he's going to do it is strip naked and stand half covered in a pool of water. Are there any rivers nearby? If the GM says, why are you doing this? And you say, it is the way of my people. This is how we worship the nature goddess. Or come up with little customs that they need to do whenever they walk in through a door. Perhaps they tap either ear, or perhaps they twirl their long eyebrows whenever they meet one another. Perhaps their greeting is not so much this as perhaps it is something a little bit more interesting. I don't know. It's entirely up to you to decide what type of ownership you will take of that race. And the more that you can invest into it, the more that you can come up with, well, my character actually goes shopping for a particular type of bracelet and it needs to have this carving on it. Or I go to a goldsmith and I get the goldsmith to make a pair of braces, one which has the head of a lion on it, the other which has the head of a wolf on it. And I present the one bracer to our leader of the party, the one with the lion's head on it, because he is our leader and the lion in my culture symbolizes leadership. You're adding in facets of storytelling. You're just making that race your own. And if people look to your portrayal of that particular race as being the epitome of the race, there is no one else who can roleplay that particular race as well as you do, because you just get them by using these steps to make them your own, then you have truly become a great player. I hope these tips have helped you to understand role-playing a different race and maybe to get some insight into the current race that you're playing and how to really take it to the next level. Until next time, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, leave your comments below, more questions on different videos, keep them coming. Until next time, Shavash Maror. Happy playing.